We are going to make our own music. We are going to use Soundtrap, but this time around we're not going to use any loops, no pre-made, nothing. We are going to program drums. We are going to input chords. We are going to input a bass part, and we're also going to add some surprise elements. But this first video, in an effort to make it about a class length, won't get to those, I don't think. All right, so we are in Soundtrap. You will have clicked on your period specific link in Canvas, and you will have a blank project. Before we get into that, however, and I'm not going to have you answer any questions on this yet. This is super important stuff, though. I want to talk about MIDI. All right, MIDI is an acronym, and it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. You'll most likely, win a trivia contest if you can say that. MIDI is, a lot of people say MIDI when they're talking about a MIDI keyboard, but a keyboard really is just a way of communicating MIDI data with a computer, into a computer. So MIDI is actually kind of a language. It's a communication protocol, and it allows computers to talk with and control synthesizers, different electronic instruments, samplers, even video machines, and a variety of things. Back in the day, when I was coming up, you would have on the back of a keyboard, and I'm looking at this picture in the bottom left-hand side, this keyboard is a Yamaha DX7, a classic from the 80s, has sounds in it. It is a synthesizer. It creates its own sounds. But in order to kind of quote-unquote record it and manipulate the notes and things like that, you would use MIDI cables that looked like this and connect it to a MIDI interface over here on the bottom right, and all of that, the interface would be connected to a computer. So this kind of is the routing, the general routing of an old school system where a keyboard went into and out of a MIDI interface, and then there might even be a piece of hardware that just had sounds but didn't have keys on it. And you could tell, the computer would say, hey, keyboard, talk to this thing, make the sounds of the piano on this piece of hardware come out into the speakers or the headphones, even though there are other sounds inside of this keyboard. These days, we tend to have much simpler connections. We might have a MIDI keyboard like this that's connected via USB to our computer, and that's it. This type of keyboard has no sounds in it. It strictly is a controller. And what kind of messages does this keyboard send out? It sends out, so this is an important little point, MIDI data makes no sound. It has no sound associated with it. It tells other devices to make sound. So right now, Soundtrap has all of the sounds that we are going to tell to play. When we're at school, Pro Tools has access to its own instruments as well as some third-party aftermarket instruments, drums, synths, strings, guitars, whatever you can think of. On-off information. So what kind of MIDI does this keyboard tell communicate to the computer? On-off information. I've hit middle C and I stopped hitting it. So the notes that you play and when you play them, the duration of those notes, how long you hold them. So if I hold, say, ACE, a chord and I hold it for one measure exactly, that's contained and communicated through MIDI. Velocity, how hard I hit the notes. Did I play them softly? Did I really hit them hard to kind of get some attack to them? As well as more. You know, there's these wheels on most keyboards. Standard is modulation and a pitch wheel. Those are also able to communicate what they do to instruments in your DAW of choice. So modulation tends to control essentially like a filter or a modulation element, an envelope in a synth. Pitch literally bends a note up or down, usually about a semitone or more. Okay, so that's the basic concepts of MIDI. There are no sounds associated with MIDI. Your MIDI keyboard or the MIDI notes that we're going to draw in essentially tell, in this instance, Soundtrap, what notes we want to play, how long we want to play them, etc. So, what music or notes are we going to be using? So, this document is going to be available to you. And basically, it reviews some of the things that we did in our last ed puzzle. You know, a chord is a combination of notes. We are going to put 3 chords into this for this song. It's a repetitive song. It's a classic. You'll all probably know it. We are going to put bass. So remember that bass tends to play the lowest note of a chord an octave below. Sometimes it might be 2 octaves, depends on the sound and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so it plays the root note or the tonic. We are going to input a tempo, so we are going to establish the speed of the song, and we're going to put in, you know, a pitch essentially is notes. So, you know, it is the musical note. We're going to be triggering many pitches. And if you remember in the video around about chords and piano notes, we have to know the piano notes, not only for the chords that we're going to put in, but also for the drums, because we're going to be referencing piano notes in Soundtrap that trigger or are associated with specific drums in the drum machine instrument. All right, so there are 3 chords in this song. One is G flat major, which is made up in this case of 3 notes: G flat, B flat, and D flat. X marks the spot, all black keys. E flat minor, which is E flat, G flat, and B flat. Again, 3 black keys. And then we have D flat major, which is D flat, F, the only white key that we'll be drawing in, and A flat. Okay, 3 chords. I'll just go over the next page here. It's going to look something like this. Okay, so this is that G flat, the B flat, the D flat, and it looks like, if you can tell, and this is Pro Tools, so it's, you know, easier for me to see, these are drawn out for 1 measure on their own. Okay, each chord is played 1 measure. The G flat plays twice, but you can see that it kind of triggers itself again. This is what the keys part or the piano part or the organ or whatever sound you choose will look like. The bass, as you can see, for the G flat, the bass is playing G flat. But if you see this number 2, that is C2 and C3. I have this chord starting on C2. And the bass is playing, I'm sorry, it's not C2. It's G flat 2. And the bass is playing G flat 1. So it is an octave below, below the chords that are being played by whatever keyboard instrument, piano instrument you choose. The drums are going to look something like this. Essentially, eighth notes, I think. I'll make sure that when we do it, I'm sure I'll make some mistakes. And we're actually going to change this up, so it may not look quite like this. And I'll explain why we're going to change it up and how we're going to change it up when we get to it. Okay, so 3 chords, bass, drums. Let's actually start with drums. I think it's a good place to start because it gives us a sense of rhythm, and it will know better if we're on the right track. When we put our music down, if we have drums, better than just listening to the metronome. Okay, that gets boring pretty quick. So we are going to enter a tempo. So the first thing we're going to do is come over to this 120 and click on it, and we're going to input 137 and hit confirm. Now already I'm going to break some of the rules that I had talked to you about with drum programming. And I always say it, and I stand by it, I don't think I'm wrong, that drums, kick drums tend to play on beats 1 and 3 of a measure. Snare drums tend to play on quarter notes 2 and 4 of a measure. 137 is a very fast tempo. This song that we're creating, that shall remain unnamed for now, really feels like 68.5. But because Soundtrap doesn't allow us to do half beats per minute, we're going to do what's called programming in double time. So actually, we're programming in double time, but it's a half-time feel. So our tempo is going to be 137, but it's going to feel like 68.5. And part of what that means is that to hear 2 snare drums, like boom, cack, a boom, boom, cack, that is 2 snare drums, 1 measure. It's actually going to take 2 measures to get through that musical motif, or that loop, essentially. So here we go. We're going to add a new track because we're doing this all by hand. We are going to input drums and beats. Now, this is what they call the pattern generator drum programming interface, and it's fine. I can put a kick drum on beat 1. The difference in terms of what I was just explaining, we are not going to put our snare drum on beat 2. We're going to put it on beat 3. Now, why is that 3? It looks like it's, the 9th beat. These are quarter notes. So I mean, I should say each square represents a 16th note. So you see 1, this is measure 1 until we get up to 2. So these groups of 4 are all quarter notes. And it is quite easy. It's fine. We can do this. But I'm going to have us go to what's called the piano roll. And we can do this because it transfers over. So let me finish the first measure. So let's see, kick on 1 and kick on 4. Let me see what that sounds like. Perfect. Okay. That's our first measure. Now, if I hit piano roll, and I would like you to do that, you're going to see what looks more like what I was showing you in Pro Tools. And what's happening here is C1. I could hit a piano, a controller, a MIDI keyboard. C1 is not a C, it's a kick drum. D is not a piano, it's a snare drum. And in this case, F sharp, 1, meaning it's in the first octave, is our hi-hat. And we can enter notes two different ways. We can either double click, like I just did, if we have this cursor instrument, or we can choose the pencil tool and kind of establish a length. If you notice, I can go up to the end of any of these and make them as long as I want. And that first one drew in as a longer note, but as soon as I changed it, everything after that became what I wanted. So same thing as using that beat generator. All right, and I'm kind of eyeballing some of this stuff. Let's see. Boom. That's off. Okay, so that is the basic drum beat. So we have a kick on beat 1, we have snare on beat 3, we have kick on beat 4. Okay, looking at kind of the groups of 4. This starts our second measure. So we actually don't have a kick on beat 1. We have a kick on the 3rd 16th note of beat 2. And we have our second snare drum on beat 3 again. So beat 3 of measure 1, beat 3 of measure 2. Here is our drum beat in a loop. Let me zoom out here. I'm going to take cycle mode and just establish it for 2 measures. Here goes. Okay, so now what I want to do, and I'm kind of planning ahead a little bit, I want to take this piece, so I can close this for a moment. I want to take this region, so I'm highlighting it by clicking on it, and I want to duplicate it. So we've learned a couple ways we can duplicate. We can either hit copy, place our cursor, and hit paste, or Command V, and that's that, okay? This is actually kind of our intro, this 4 measures. We're going to copy this again, so we can just place our cursor, Command V. This is kind of where the song starts with vocals and things like that. So we have a 4 measure intro, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. What we're going to do here is double click into this region, which then brings us back to the pattern generator. Although we're looking, it shows us the measures where we are, or where our cursor is, I should say, our playback head. I'm going to go into the piano roll again. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to enter a couple of, or I'm going to put in another measure's worth of hi-hats, because I know that those aren't going to change. They can, but I'm not planning on it. I can talk about something else too, that's fine. Let me put our cursor. Okay, I need another measure. Zoom out a little bit just to manage everything. Okay, get back. All right, I need to see. So one thing that's interesting about Soundtrap is your grid when your grid value is set to 16ths, I'm going to set it to automatic. When it's set to automatic, when you zoom in, you see even more grid values. You can get up to 30 seconds and 60/4. Those of you who are ready to put in those fast rolls, we'll see about that. I'm already about 20 minutes into this video and we haven't even finished the drum beat. Okay, let me start here again. Boom. Kick drum on 1. Same idea here. Actually, it's going to move over. I'm sorry, I'm making some errors here. Let's see if that's what we want. My apologies. Let me see if that, there we go. Okay, so here is our basic drum beat starting the song off. All right, so I'm going to go over this because I want everybody to have it right. Our basic drum beat, which is going to be 2 measures long at 137 BPM, is very similar to the previous measures that we created. We have a kick on beat 1 and a kick on, let me just say we have snare drums on beat 3. Okay, that's kind of easy. And even though this isn't quite the same length, it's because I was drawing it. Length doesn't matter as much with drums. It does matter with pianos and such. So beat 3, snare drums. On every beat 3, there's a snare drum. Kicks, beat 1, beat 4, into measure 6. This is the 3rd 16th note of beat 2. Back to beat 1 of measure 7. And then beat 4 of measure 7. And then in measure 8, we're back to the 3rd 16th note of beat 2. And that's it for our kick drums. After our 4th snare drum on beat 3, we're going to put in another 16th note. This is the 4th 16th note of beat 3, the 1st 16th note of beat 4, and the 3rd 16th note of beat 4. So maybe a little bit complicated to think through. Let's look at it in the beat generator in case this makes more sense. You'd like to try it out. So measure 8 has no kick drum on beat 1. It does have a kick drum on the 3rd 16th note of beat 2. And that's that, of measure 8 at least. Okay, so our drum pattern, essentially, if we just listen to, let's put on cycle mode. I'm going to drag this cycle over here because this is what I want to hear over and over again. So I said these 4 measures, these repeat and they don't have this little fill in it. That's really the only difference. I want to actually keep this 4 measure phrase as a 4 measure phrase, and I'll explain why in a minute. But let's just listen to it in a loop and make sure that it works. Okay, so that is our loop. And remember, it feels slower than it is because we, instead of putting our drums, instead of putting our snare drums on beat 2 and 4, which, to be honest, let's see what that sounds like. Why not? So measure 1, if I had to turn off cycle. If I didn't play the snare drum on beat 3 and I put it on 2 and 4 and I put my kick drum, this is what that would sound like. Let's cycle that so I can fix it also. Cycle. Okay, totally different feel. In fact, what I'm going to do is delete it. I'm going to highlight this one, Option, click, drag too far, undo, undo, and hopefully that works. Okay, so that's the drums. And the reason that I want to have this, I'm going to explain that and be done with it with 4 minutes to spare on my half hour, is that there's a loop function in Soundtrap that is kind of cool. If you know that you're just going to play something more than once, maybe we might say over and over again, you can come up to the upper right hand corner where you see that looping kind of icon that pops up, and you can simply click and drag for as long as you would like that same pattern to play. So I've added it to play for another 12 measures. Now, there is a concept that's important to know here. If you double click into this and look at the piano roll, you're going to see that the first 4 measures, so this section here, which represents measure 5 through 8, is darker colors than these, and I cannot click on these. This one, so from here, let me do it with just as a visual aid with the cycle ruler. This 4-measure loop is what's called a bass region, B-A-S-E, not B-A-S-S like the instrument. And these are called shadow regions, simply because they're drawn out as a repetitive loop. You cannot edit these. But even after the fact, if you decide, oh, I want to put something different in here, you can always place your playhead or your cursor and separate, and then it kind of allows these to be their own bass region as opposed to shadow regions. The thing that is kind of cool, I'm going to undo that and keep this as a bass region, is that if you decide that you want to do something significant to one, so you can see this faded area, this is my shadow region, and I'm just going to show you that if I put a note in there, it puts a note in every shadow region that you have drawn out. So it's a really easy way to add a repetitive component into your beat. It's called mirrored MIDI editing in Pro Tools and in other DAWs. So for the moment, I'm just going to draw or loop this out for about a minute, and we'll leave it at that. That's the drums, and the goal would be for everyone to have drums.